Good morning to everyone and welcome to this 8th meeting of the EARMA, Ethics and Research Integrity Network. I am Borana, Project Manager at the EARMA for Ethics and Research Integrity, and I'm here today also with Nick Klassen, Managing Director at the EARMA. Actually, Nick, I will immediately turn over to you. I'm sure you want to say a few welcoming words.
Hello, hi everyone. Great to see or not see you all, but I know you're there. We had a great registration. And I think it's now the 8th ERION meeting, so it's been going for almost 4 years. I just want to say from the side of EARMA, from the whole association, we're really happy for this group to be so active, and I hope also as useful as possible to the members. Ethics and research integrity really is at the top of the EARMA agenda, and very much also, I think, on the top of a lot of other agendas, especially in regards to Horizon Europe and in the national agendas. I don't want to say too much. I want to welcome you on behalf of everybody and wish you a very good session. I think Borana and all of the speakers have a nice program lined up for you. Thank you so much, Borana, and all of you have a lovely event.
Thank you, Nick. So now from my side, I will shortly present the ERION network, especially for those of our colleagues who are joining us for the first time today. So I will share my screen for this. So ERION, this is the 8th meeting. As we mentioned, the network has been established in 2018. We have been meeting since then in several locations across Europe. And of course, last year, due to the pandemic, we moved all of our activities online. We have been discussing several topics of interest to the community, such as implementation of Gdpr, training. Today, we're addressing open science, and the overall topic of this year is focused on Horizon Europe. You are probably aware that the focus of the ERION group is a bit particular compared to other groups working on ethics and integrity. It's about the practical and implementation side. So our colleagues are mainly practitioners who are working with compliance and also in implementing policies in their respective institution, as well as developing those policies. Our next meetings are foreseen for December and March 2022. The event on the 7th of December is a workshop, 90 minutes workshop, where we would like to disseminate about the ERION network, especially to colleagues working in research support office at the EARMA, and have a dialogue about what does it mean to be a research integrity officer or advisor. Then we'll have the official next meeting, the 9th meeting of the network on the 15th of March. So I'm very happy here to announce that we are planning this meeting to be physical in Brussels or in another location in Belgium, to be announced soon. So please book the dates and stay tuned, because finally we will be able to meet each other in person after this almost 2 years of working online. Should you wish more information about the ERION network, please have a look at the YouTube channel of EARMA. We have some recordings from the previous sessions, and also you can check the EARMA website information. Also, we have a publication about research integrity training. And of course, you can always contact me. You have my contact details through the email. Now, for the agenda for today, we have a very nice program. This morning, we'll start with the first session, setting the scene. We have colleagues from Ghent University, European Commission, and from the ROSI project. And the session will be moderated by Stephanie van der Broek, Research Integrity Advisor at Ghent University, and also ERION co-chair. Then we'll go for a short break, and we have a second session where we go a bit deeper into the topic of the meeting today, with good examples, challenging areas of open science with ethical implications. Here we'll have colleagues from F1000 and Utrecht University, and the session is moderated by Jonas Ackerman, Research Integrity and Ethics Coordinator, Stockholm University, and together with Stephanie, ERION co-chair. Then we have another short break, We know that in online meetings, these are very important. And for the last part of the meeting at 11:45 CET, we'll be able to have a more interactive discussion. We'll be able to put our videos and cameras on. And we have several discussion tables with moderators and rapporteurs. Please, you will follow the instructions throughout Zoom. So this brings me to thank also two of my colleagues who are not visible for now today, Johanna and Niall. They are there. You have met Johanna already in the chat. And Niall, he will also be tweeting about the event. So thank you very much for being with us today and supporting us for a nice meeting together. So this is all from my side. I would like now to hand over to Stephanie for the moderation of the next session. Stephanie, this is for you now, and please be aware, I see that we are already almost 100 colleagues here online. You can use the chat to interact with each other, but if you have questions for the speakers, use the Q&A, and then Stephanie, myself, and Jonas will hand these questions to the speakers for you. Stephanie, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Borana. First of all, good morning, everyone. We're so happy to have you all with us here today. And it's very exciting news to hear that we're so many people already here. So that's a great start. We're going to jump straight in. And our first speaker is Inge van Neuerberg, who is part of the Open Science team at Ghent University. And as an expert, she is involved in numerous groups and organizations, which makes her absolutely the right person to introduce us to the theme. Inge will speak for about 15 minutes, and you can already write down your questions in the Q&A. I think that we will take questions or some questions immediately after the presentation of Inge. And if we should have time at the end of this session, we can take some more questions. So Inge, you may be the first. Welcome and good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Happy to be here. Let me share my screen so you can see my PowerPoint. I suppose you can see my PowerPoint now, Stephanie?
Yes,
okay. I have a bit of a cold, so sorry if I start coughing in between. These things still can happen, colds, not only the COVID ones. So I'm Inge van Neuerberg. I work at Ghent University Library, of which you see a nice picture of the renovated building. We just moved in back this summer. And I'm showing this because I work in the library, and our credo is facilitating open knowledge creation, which very well expresses what we want to do. We want to facilitate our researchers to create, to find information, to create knowledge, and as open as possible. That is a good thing to have as well. So we're talking about open science today. So let me give you a bit of an introduction to what we are talking about, because I still see in several contexts that it's not always that obvious that there are different interpretations of what open science is. And when we talk about open science in a European context, we mean all sciences, including social sciences and humanities. So it's all the sciences that are included and not only exact or applied sciences, for example, medicine. And what we want to do in open science is to open up the whole research process, and open up, that doesn't mean that everything should be open for everyone, but it should be transparent. It should be possible to verify things. It should be available and free for the interested parties if it's an accessible piece of work. And it's not only the end result, the publication, that should be accessible for verification and for everyone to use or reuse as much as possible, as said, but also other parts of the research process. You will hear here and there that I use the nuance as open as possible. Sometimes things have to be closed, and I will come back to that during my presentation. Certainly when we talk about integrity, this is something to take into account. When we talk about open science, again, it's not only about open access to publications, it's about open data, it's about research data management, it's about citizen science, it's about open source software, open peer review, a lot of open in here, but remember, it's especially about transparency and willing to share information and knowledge where possible. And this is very much in line with what research integrity is about. You probably know about the project responsible research and innovation. And this is a picture from that project that still shows how this all how you combine all these things. And open access now, we would say open science is part of this picture, because open science gives, as said, access to research information, which is key for policymakers, which is key for the education community, but also for public engagement. We certainly want to include citizens through citizen science, for example, in research processes, but we also want to make sure that research results are can be applied by people in the field, by professionals. Think about engineers and in companies, think about teachers, think about doctors in the fields, etc., etc. So this is real openness, and open science is really part of this process, to have a diverse and in a diverse and inclusive world. So you have this citizen out there who also says, I do not belong to the academic world, but I would like to do research all the same. Now let's go into open science practices, and let's start with open access to publications, because well, that's what it all started with. Well, by now 30 years ago, with preprint service like archive.org. What you see here is how you think about publication within your research process. At a certain moment in time, you have research results you want to share with the world. So publication is really about research results, but you see more and more intermediate communication, dissemination of results. And the first thing that people do is reflect on, what do I want to publish? What can I publish? Because, as said before, not everything can be published. And sometimes there will be a decision to have IP protection, for example. Now, at the moment that you decide to publish, the first question comes up: do I want to share my preprint? Now, in the last 2 years, a year and a half, 2 years, and then this COVID pandemic, we have seen that sharing of preprints is a very valuable thing to do to speed up the process of research. But of course, here and there are some caveats, because we have seen preprints appearing that afterwards, after peer review, were not solid enough, methodology was not good enough, the results were not reliable. But on the whole, if you look at the whole field, it was a very positive experience to share many preprints to push forward the research. But as said, we still have to be careful with preprints. You always have to know that when you come upon a preprint, it hasn't been peer reviewed yet. But the more preprints are out there, the more you see that before it was already like that, you are very careful with what you write in your publication, but you are double, you look even more to what's in your paper and make sure that it is valid. And this is always the case, but it's an extra motivation, let's put it that way. And then afterwards, they can be preprint. There can be peer review on the preprint, and you can decide to do the peer review through a toll access journal, so where we all pay to read the journal, or you can do that through an open access journal or an open access platform. It's not only about open access journals anymore. The platforms are really more innovative, with more the preprints and the actual publication all mixing up actually with the new ideas being added all the time. Now, whatever you do, whenever you publish in a classical journal, in an open access journal, on an open access platform, in the end, the best way to go forward is to put that publication in an open repository to have it disseminated to the world, not only through the journal, but through repositories where they're also archived, linked with projects, linked with data, linked with the institution, etc. There are some things that people might consider as a repository, but which are not a repository. And that's personal websites, databases, personal databases, some publisher websites, cloud storage such as Google Drive, Dropbox, but also social networks such as academia.edu, ResearchGate, and similar platforms. Mendeley, for example, is another one. Repositories are really fitted to exchange information. They're open APIs, so that's a technical term to say that in the back end, the repository is open for everyone to search. It's machine readable, using standards, open protocols, and things like that. So, and most repositories are maintained by a research institution or by a discipline as a whole. So it's also governed by the community, research community, which is rather important. In our university, we have Biblio, the academic bibliography / open repository, where our researchers can deposit their publication. It can be the publisher version, and it can be the accepted author manuscript, AAM, which has gone through peer review, but is not in the layout of the publisher, a version that, according to Belgian law, we can open, the author can open after 6 to 12 months, depending on the discipline. But you will see that in the end, when we talk about Horizon Europe, all journal publications, scholarly communications should be open immediately. Now you can ask yourself, where do I find a good repository if I don't have one in my institution? Open Door is a guide, is a directory, a guide through all the repositories for publications, so you can look one up there. So that's a good way to find a repository. Now, by now there are a lot of open access journals, so many people will publish immediately in an open access journal. The directory of open access journals is, again, a guide for open access journals. And the subset of this directory adheres to the 16 principles of transparency and best practice in scholarly publishing. These are publications where the governing body, for example, have members who are recognized experts in the subject. They use open licenses. I will say something about open licenses in a few minutes. The publication ethics are stated on the website. It's very easy to find that information. So these are a few of the transparency rules for open access journals to make sure that they have a high level of quality. By the way, all the publications, all the journals in the directory of open access journals are peer reviewed, and that is checked. By now, oh no, this, I think, no, is this not? No, I made this picture yesterday or the day before. By now, more than 16,000 journals are in directory of open access journal, and they are multilingual. There are many languages in the directory of open access journals. But as said, more and more publication platforms appear where you have a combination of flows throughout the process of publication. For example, the Open Research Europe is the publication platform of the European Commission, where for now, publications coming out of European projects can be deposited. So there's an article submission where you immediately put your preprint in the open out there. Open peer review is afterwards performed. Open peer review has different different ways to do open peer review, but one of them is that the reviewers are known. The second part can be that the review text is also visible, that afterwards the comments can come in. So this is a platform where really open peer review is performed. When they are approved, they get an approved status, like this is peer reviewed. But all preprints stay on that platform unless there is a very, very, very good reason because of fraud or whatever to remove a publication. You only have real open access when an open license is attached to a publication, and the Creative Commons license makes it clear for everyone what the user can do with a publication. CC BY is the most commonly used for journal articles. So this means that CC BY that everyone can reuse or put the article somewhere else on another website, but quoting what the source is. But there are many, there are 6 established Creative Commons licenses, and it's advised to use them to have real open access. Another advised concept is to use an ORCID as an author. An ORCID is a unique ID for a scholarly author, and many publishers already request an ORCID from their authors, and more initiatives do as well. So this is a way to uniquely identify yourself. If there are any questions about that, I can answer that. But I don't have that much time, and I really have to say something about research data management. Research data management is part of the open science process about transparency. It doesn't necessarily mean that research data should be open. It's about good management of your research data. And the FAIR principles for data are very crucial there. FAIR data principles means that data should be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. It doesn't necessarily mean they should be open. It should be clear where the data of behind research, where they could be found, where you could request access if needed, what level of openness they have, which kind of formats are used for that data, etc., etc. These kind of things make the process transparent, but not necessarily the data open. Because we in research data management, the guide is as open as possible, as close as necessary, and which is a grayscale from very open access to everyone in the world, everyone can reuse it, to very closed, restricted access that you really have to request it with a good reason before you can access data. Think about very personal data. The GDPR has a big influence there, of course. If you have a survey with 100 citizens, something like that, these people don't want everything to be open out in the world. It's if it's about whatever they talk about. So this is important to acknowledge that this is the case. The question here, the ethical integrity question here is, they can be closed for legitimate reasons as well. What are legitimate reasons to keep data closed? Where is the boundary? And that is sometimes where you see the friction in research data management and open data. When do you open data, and what is legitimate interest not to open data? In the end, what you want is that even raw data is archived, is kept somewhere safe so that it can be checked afterwards. So trustworthiness of your research, reproducibility of your research is an important thing here. And you have a lot of benefits as researchers. A guide for your research data management is a data management plan. And you see more and more funders, like in Horizon Europe, requesting a data management plan where you explain what kind of data you are working with, or what you collect, produce, how you want to make them fair, some information about costs and resources, information about data security and ethical aspects. In some data management planning tools, you will also see ethical aspects in like that. Then a second thing is where do you keep your data and where you give access to data. So how to select a suitable repository. In some disciplines, there are good repositories in place. Some have an institutional find one on we3data.org. It can be open repository or a more closed, more like an archive repository to deposit your data. And what you deposit is the data, some metadata to describe the data, and other documentation that can help explain what the data is about. And a good repository helps you make your data fair. And for example, in Zenodo, you have different tools to make your data fair. For example, there is a DOI. You see that on the right side, publication date, DOI. DOI is a unique identifier of where your data can be accessed. If all this data is fair and is findable, as said, not all data should be openly available. You can create something like the European Open Science Cloud in Europe, where you have a lot of data repositories, a lot of infrastructures, research infrastructures that are connected and that use same kinds of protocols and standards, or at least they can exchange it so that you can connect data sets, not only within your own field, but across fields. So multidisciplinary research is easier than when you find the different data sets through standardized ways. And to end with, in Horizon, when we're talking about Europe, in Horizon Europe, quite some open science practices are included in the requirements of a proposal and in the management of your project. In our university, our open science team has made this overview of how to address open science in your proposal, because that's where our researchers are at the moment and at this stage, making proposals in the new calls for Horizon Europe. So we try to help them with this overview. This being said, I think this is a good bridge to the next speaker, but I'm happy to answer any questions, of course.
Yes, okay, thank you, Inge. That was very interesting. I saw already in the Q&A that we have some questions. First question is from Catherine, who asks if ResearchGate is not a trusted repository, just a confirmation. Mm-hmm.
Just to be sure, this is a commercial platform, which is quite, it's an interesting thing, an interesting network to connect with your peers. Absolutely, but it's not an open repository. It doesn't have these APIs, and it's a closed network.
Yeah, if I understand correctly, we should kind of see it like the socials we have in our personal lives, so the Facebook for researchers. So it's
a bit like that, yeah. I don't say that it's not valuable, but it is not an open repository.
Yeah, okay. And then also a question from Marusha. I understand that you propose to upload a copy of your paper in a repository, even if it was published in an open access journal?
Yes, indeed. Don't forget that many repositories are hosted within an institution, and they are archived there, but also linked to other resources within the university. Plus, these open repositories are very well connected, and they very well findable within Google or whatever, and many library catalogs and things like that. So there are several reasons to also put it in a repository. Archiving is one of them. Making a good publication list of the university is second one. Connection with other information within your university, a third one. And more visibility, a fourth one. So there are several reasons to do it like that.
Okay, yes, that was indeed a question, if there were reasons or what would the reasons be to do so. So thank you. So I had one last personal question just to make sure that I understand it correctly. So if I got it right, you have repositories for preprints. So these are kind of platforms where you put your preprints on. You have platforms where you can put your publication on, which we can find through Open Door. And then we have platforms where you put your data, or repositories where you put your data on, like we have Zenodo or Re3Data. And then for all three of them, you kind of connect, or you should connect an open license to these, and an ORCID. Is that kind of a good summary of?
Well, yeah, of course, more the publication repositories, so the open repositories and preprint repositories, you see connections, you see that there isn't that much of a difference. Here and there you have real preprint servers like archive.org, which is really focused on a certain discipline and only accepts preprints to make sure that the research process is supported and that it goes fluently. But in the classical publication repositories like our own institutional repositories, you can post preprints, you can post postprints. It doesn't really make a difference.
So they're not always so.
Yes, and a data repository is a bit of a different thing, because I said publication repositories, the moment that you put publication there, a publication has been published. So there is no need to be secretive about it or whatever. In data repositories, you have different levels. You have this scale of openness, and well, some data can't be opened, so they are more measures there to control your repository. I don't say that in the end they will merge or somehow or whatever, but at this moment they are different repositories. However, whether it's a data repository, a preprint server, a publication platform, an open repository, or your publisher, whatever, use an ORCID to uniquely identify yourself, that's for sure, and use open licenses, because an open license shows what you can do with the data. Do I allow reuse or not? Do I want to be quoted as a source or not? Can anyone make a derivative or not?
So it's a kind of guidance when you put it on a repository.
You can all put something on Facebook, on a personal website, but if there's no open license, no one can reuse it. It's there, you have the copyright, you do whatever you want with the text, but anyone else can't. If you put a license up front, you say, well, you don't have to ask me for permission to reuse my poem that I have put here on my website. I put a CC BY license, which says, well, you can reuse it, repost it, but put my name underneath it. Or you put a CC BY non-commercial, where you say, okay, you can reuse it if you don't reuse it commercially. So it's a clear guide for the user, which is also machine readable of what you can do with this content.
Okay, thank you. I see that we have 2 more questions in the Q&A, but we are going to keep them for after the presentations, if we have time for that, because we're going to our next speaker, and that is Sylvia. And Sylvia is our personal link with the European Commission this morning, not only being part of the European Open Science unit, but also having a long history of working and studying in open in European context. I saw. So Sylvia, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Stephanie, and thanks also, Joanna, for sharing the presentation. So I will, well, first of all, thanks very much for the invitation, and I'll go through this presentation about the link that exists between open science and research integrity, and also how via the Horizon Europe program we are incentivized some open science practices that contribute indeed to research integrity. Next slide. This is about what we mean by open science, and I think Inge already very excellently explained, but just also to stress that such a definition, we also have it now in the legal text of the Horizon Europe regulation and also in the model grant agreement. And as Inge was also mentioning, so open science is an approach to the entire scientific process, not just at the final stages of the project's life cycle, but it involves the entire process. And it's based indeed on sharing as early and as openly as possible knowledge and tools, and not only within researchers or between researchers across different disciplines, but also with the society at large. And why do we care about open science and why we think it is an important policy priority for us? It's because it has the potential indeed to increase the quality and efficiency of research and innovations if all the results are shared, made reusable, and also ultimately improving the reproducibility of research. It increases creativity by pulling together collective intelligence and facilitated cross-disciplinary as well fertilization. And it also increased the trust in the science system, indeed through the involvement as well of societal actors such as citizens as well. Next slide, please. So there is really a clear link between open science and research integrity, and this was clearly recognized as well by the Council and Member States in Council conclusions that were adopted in 2015, where indeed it was mentioned that the research integrity is really at the foundation of high quality research and recognizes how open science and research integrity are mutually reinforcing each other. So you could see Member States recognize the importance of open science as a mechanism for reinforcing research integrity, but also at the same time how research integrity contributes to open science. Next slide. And research integrity was also an important dimension that was the focus of the Open Science Policy Platform that in the past years has been advising the European Commission on the implementation of open science policies. And in the final report of the platform, which was published last year, there were clearly some recommendation for some further action needed in the field of research integrity. So as you can see, the recommendation concerned the policies. So the need really for all research organizations to have research integrity policies in place and also mechanisms to ensure adherence with these policies. The fact that researchers as well and all research projects should define conditions by which the work can be replicated and verified by others. And reproducibility is really important in this context. But also, I think there is also a positive circle between research integrity and training, because researchers need to be trained as well to embed into their practice good research practices. And so they must receive regular training in research integrity at all career stages. And finally, there was also a point in our recommendation about quality control, and the fact that publishers, data platform and infrastructure also must have a standardized set of minimum quality control checks. And I'm sure in the next session, Kelly Woods will explain this to you, but in Open Research Europe, so the publishing platform of the Commission, of course, we have sound publication policies that ensure that ethics policies are complied with, that there is also a clear declaration on competing interest, data availability, to ensure reproducibility and so on. The next slide. So here I wanted to make a clear focus on reproducibility. Also, as you can see, the OSPP, this was part of recommendation and a clear important point for us, and why there is a close relation between reproducibility and research integrity, because they both have the same aim, so to ensure the trustfulness of the results, and also research integrity as a reproducibility also refers to the process of good research practices. And here you see there is a clear problem that we have at the moment, and some studies have demonstrated that, for example, some as 85% of research in the health field is not reproducible. And of course, the magnitude of the problem could be different according to different disciplines, yet some numbers that we are seeing are quite striking. And in a world where resources are limited, it's really important that the investment that we made in research can also be reused, and the data and the results that we have can be used by other researchers and can be also validated by others. And this really is super important for the trust also of external actors in science. We made a report, and we published a report last year that really was a scoping report on reproducibility, where we really tried to map some of the emerging issues that we see in this field. Next slide. And you can also see that reproducibility is linked to the entire research life cycle as much as it is research integrity, and failure at any point of the research life cycle and any of this junction undermines the validity of research and also good research process. And here, I guess that this graph, you might know it very well. And what I added here is the contribution of open science practices to address some of the possible bias and flaws that there can be. So for example, publication bias could be mitigated by early and open sharing of research, for example, through pre-registration, register reports, but also the data deposition in repositories. I think was also mentioned by Inge before, the importance of research data management, and then at the end of the process as well provide open access to outputs, tools or instruments that are needed to validate research conclusions so that others are able to reproduce the research and to validate the findings and place trust in the discoveries that have been made and their validity. And next, and also, to next. Here I think that there is an important, let's say, thing to remember, and that it's, I think, really central to make open science practices more systematically uptaken in the future. And it's about reforming the current research assessment system that we know sometimes is, and often is really based now on narrow metrics, such as the journal impact factor that plays really a lot of importance on a unique type of output, the publications, and only on actually the prestige of the venue where the results are shared and published. And this is, of course, needs to be changed and needs to go towards a more qualitative system that takes into account behaviors such as open collaboration, sharing of knowledge, and tools that are so important for the trustworthiness of the research and to ensure its integrity. And really there is such narrow, let's say, at the moment, indicators and metrics that we have also undermine research integrity because they don't place the focus really on the quality, rigor, and openness of the research, but just on prestige and as I was saying, a unique output, the publication. So next slide. So how are we actually encouraging open science practices that reinforce research integrity in Horizon Europe? And this is probably also very practical information for you who are helping applicants in designing their proposal or will support researchers in carrying out and in implementing a research project. So under Horizon Europe, open science really becomes a key, and we have broadened our approach. We don't talk anymore about open access, but we talk indeed about open science and the practices that concern the entire research process. So here you see we have some open science practices that are mandatory and are mandatory for all beneficiaries because they are enshrined in Article 17 of the Model Grant Agreement. So if you want, these are sort of contractual obligations that the beneficiary have. And this concern, and I'm pointing here the ones that have also a particular relevance for research integrity, and it's about the publication. So provide immediate open access to peer-reviewed publication via trusted repositories under open licenses. This is CC BY for articles, and we allow for the non-derivative and non-commercial variants licenses to be applied in case of long text formats such as monographs and other types of books. The importance as well of research data management. So in Horizon Europe, we place on this a very strong focus, and actually all, and this is research data management in line with the FAIR principles of findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability of the data. It's actually, there is no possibility to opt out from this. So all research projects that actually are generating or reusing data needs to responsibly manage the data in line with FAIR, and include as well a fully fledged data management plan that needs to be provided by the month 6 of the project. And as Inge was saying, the principle here is also to provide open access to the data under the principle as open as possible, as closed as necessary. So if there are legitimate constraints, such as, for example, privacy, data protection, or the need to safeguard, for example, the competitive interest of the union or other concern, it is possible to keep the data closed. However, this will have to be justified in the data management plan, because we want, of course, the data to be open by default and closed when there are legitimate reasons to do so. And also we have in Horizon Europe, as I was saying, reproducibility is very important to us. So we have really some strong measures to ensure that the research that we fund under Horizon Europe is reproducible. So we will ask the beneficiaries to provide information on any tools, results, or instruments that are needed to validate the conclusion of a scientific publication or for the reuse of the data. And also we will request access to such results, tool or instrument for validation of publication to be provided unless legitimate interest needs to be safeguarded. And in that case, of course, it can be justified that access is not provided. But in general, as a default, we want really to see access as well to these results that are needed to validate the conclusion of the publications. Next slide. I talk about some mandatory practices, but there are also some open science practices that are recommended, and we incentivize them through, for example, the evaluation of the proposals. So these concern, for example, early and open sharing of research to pre-registration, register reports, preprints, open access to research outputs beyond data and publications. So for example, open access to software, model, algorithm through the position in trusted repository, participation in open peer review, as we see the benefits of opening up and make the review and the reports from peer review accessible, increase as well the scrutiny and the trustworthiness of the research that has been conducted. And also very important, and it's certainly now last in the list, but not at all the least, it's involving all relevant knowledge actors such as citizens, civil society, and end users in the co-creation of RNI agenda and content. And these are really practices that we very much recommend in Horizon Europe, and we try to incentivize through the evaluation. And the next slide. I will explain how open science is evaluated at the proposal stage. As you can see, there is an important novelty in Horizon Europe, and that is that open science is now for the first time evaluated under the excellence criterion and the methodology, because as I was saying, being an integral part of the research process, open science practices really has a lot to do about the planning early on of the methodology of the research and of the project. So open science practices will be evaluated under the excellence criterion. And here under this criterion, applicants will have to explain how relevant open science practices are applied as an integral part of the methodology. And I'm saying relevant open science practices is not a ticking the box exercise, but we want really to see how open science practices help the project in further its objectives and are relevant for it. And as you can see, we also, it's not negligible, the length in a sense of what we ask to the applicants, because for example, for research and innovation action, there will be, for example, 1 page that we ask to describe the open science practices, plus maximum 1 additional page to describe research data and output management. And also, open science is evaluated under a second criterion on the quality and efficiency of the implementation. So we'll ask applicants to explain their expertise in practice on open science. So how's the consortium as a whole, as expertise in carrying out and implementing what has been described in the methodology. And also, we will ask a list of relevant publications, software, and data that are relevant to the project. And when providing such list, we expect publication to be available open access and data to be fair and as open as possible, as closed as necessary. And here an important thing that I was saying, as we try as well as the Commission to practice what we preach, is that the significance of publication will be evaluated on the basis of the qualitative assessment provided by the proposers and not per the journal impact factor. So we don't want to evaluate the significance of publication based on this narrow metric, which we consider inappropriate to judge the value of a publication. Next slide. Very quickly on this, we also have rules and specific part in the model grant agreement concerning ethics and research integrity. So for example, all our beneficiaries must respect the principles that are provided in the ALEA European Code of Conduct for Research Integrity. And as you can see, this implies compliance with several principles that, as you can see, are also very much linked to open science practices, such as ensuring reliability in the quality of research that is reflected in the methodology, honesty in communicating about research in a transparent, fair and unbiased ways, and also include good research practices such as ensuring openness, reproducibility and traceability. And very quick point on this, as I understood, next slide, I understood that from Borana, you had already other meetings where you went into depth more into this procedure, but also, actually we also, research integrity is also part of the ethics appraisal procedure of Horizon Europe. So to ensure that all activities that are carried out under the framework program are conducted in compliance with fundamental ethical principles. And so proposers are requested to conduct at proposal and were preparing their proposals an ethics self-assessment that covered a number of areas and of ethical aspects that you can see here in the slide. And these can also lead to some further ethic requirements that become part of contractual obligation also at a later stage. But as I was saying, I will not go into more depth into this process because I understood you already covered in other meetings. And with that, I have finished, and thanks very much. Happy to take any questions that there could be.
Yes,
and I hope I kept the time as well, Stephanie.
Sort or less.
Yes.
I think we're okay. Thank you very much. And you already have Chris Knighting thanking you for a great presentation, which it definitely was. He also has a question on the mandatory requirements. You listed the open licensing is interesting. How does this match the commercial publishers? Is that a problem for them? Do you experience this as a problem? Is there any pressure towards the European Commission? Could you elaborate on that?
Regarding the problem, so now it's a mandatory requirement. So it is clear that we require all our beneficiaries to apply open licenses to their publication via the repository. We see also that a number of publishers are now adapting to accommodate for this requirement to be taken up. We are really trying as much as possible to foster open access and a publishing model that actually enables for this. And another thing that I mentioned as well that I did not have time and so it was not included in the presentation, but it's important to stress is that in Horizon Europe you also require the authors or beneficiaries were the case to retain sufficient intellectual property rights to enable to comply with the open access requirements. So we see often that authors transfer rights to publishers, and this sometimes could be a problem for them to fulfill their open access obligation. So we also ask and we recommend the beneficiaries to inform the publishers of the obligation that they have under Horizon Europe when submitting their publication. So this is also clearly a way from our side to try to shift the system in this sense, and having publisher move along with us in this regard.
Okay, thank you.
Not say that it's always an easy process, but no. We try as much as we can from our side to facilitate this.
Yeah, there are definitely different stakeholders that have different thoughts on that. Okay, great, thank you. I will leave it at this. I know there are still some questions in the Q&A, but we hope to address these after our last presentation, and that is Søren and Rosemary. Søren is professor at the Universities of Manchester and Oslo, and Rosemary at the Universities of Southeastern Norway and Oslo, and they are both coordinators of ROSI. So Søren, Rosemary, tell us all about that.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. So I will, Søren and I will be sharing the presentation in 15 minutes, meaning that I will be using 10 and Søren hopefully 5. Let me please share my screen. I hope this is visible to everyone. Good morning, everybody. So today we'll be talking about research ethics and research integrity issues in open science and very early findings of the ROSI project. I say very early findings because ROSI project started only this year, so we are still in the process of doing exploratory work. But let's begin with research ethics and research integrity issues in open science. So the first issue, which I guess is often very much cited, would be the exacerbation of risks and new forms of malpractice in science. The most prominent of which would be access of the most powerful players to the gains of open science, not only in terms of accessing data, and as we saw and as we all know, when we talk of accessing data, this could really be open access to data, to closed data, to restricted data, and restrictions, of course, especially with data that has the possibility of dual use. It could be restricted only to country, and to a certain extent only within the European Union, right? Meaning that it bars access to third countries. This is, of course, this can of course be very necessary due to security reasons. But this also means that if we increase the number of data that has restricted access, first for many different reasons, then it also means that those who have restricted access gains more and more power. As we know, knowledge is power, as the saying goes. But also this can simply be a leverage to the most powerful players due to lack of information or simply lack of resources to the open science. so we here in Europe, we see already the struggle in making researchers be familiar with and actually do open science practices. And this is with all the money that is invested into it. Now, if we go to low and middle income countries, even knowledge of open science platforms becomes an issue. Simply because there's lack of funds. In understanding where to access data, that data is in fact open access. But not only data. Simply when it comes to open science practices, that as we all know, that entails a lot of promotion. And in low and middle income countries, money is better spent not only in promoting open science, but in more basic things. So this can lead to continuing how the world works. That is, powerful players have access to everything, including access to data, access to information, etc., etc. But closely connected to this would be content mining, privacy, IP, and GDPR issues. So data mining and the requirements of open science to make data accessible could increase the risk of breaching the privacy of even the anonymized research participants. So when we talk of informed consent and anonymization, data mining can in fact unravel all of that. Making what used to be anonymized now not anymore anonymized, or to remove removing anonymization because of mining. But also there's even a more basic issue of how do we make research participants understand the real risks of science that is very much open. So we already struggled before with making research participants understand the research risks that come with the research methodologies per se. But opening access to data is an additional risk, and it's a real risk, as we saw, as we stated clearly. When we talk of data mining, then there's the possibility of research participants being de-anonymized. How do we make them understand that? Current informed consent form templates do not cover such risks. And then, of course, there's also the risk of proliferation, manipulation, and hoarding of personal data. And this is very antithetical to the very nature of open science. And what do we mean by this? So when we talk of data, we're not only talking about data of shall we say, health records, for example, but we're also talking about data captured ubiquitously. For example, when we use our mobile phones and use Facebook, where we look at, what we do, which article attracts our attention, and who we relate with. All of these become data. Therefore, we provide, for example, every time that we're on Facebook, we provide Facebook with every second, with data every second that we use it. But also, if we use, for example, emerging technologies such as immersive technologies, So once you wear your VR headset, that captures data not only on what we do in it, but what we look at, where our eyeballs work. Where our hand movements, where we are, and that's what you call geospatial data. The question is then, how much do we want such data to be open? Currently, it is restricted to closed, but then because of the nature of such data, those who have access by default will be companies. The most prominent of which would be Facebook. So how do we handle such? So we have our personal data, what we call kinematic fingerprints. The only companies who have access to it will be the very big ones. Now, what do we want to do with that? Do we want it to be open? Do we want it to be restricted? Restricted in what form? or do we want it to be how it is now, closed and only corporations having access? These are all research questions, or maybe shall we say real scientific questions that the scientific community would have to think about. Currently, we don't have answers to it. And of course, there's the emergence of fake science. For example, as we all know about this, tobacco companies sponsor research to say that tobacco is not really bad for your health. But more commonly now, we have, for example, climate change deniers. And we have a lot of quote unquote scientific studies on it. I would say fake studies on it. And the same thing with COVID-19. Up to this point, there are still COVID-19 deniers, and there's a lot of fake science going on about therapies that are not really therapeutic, but claim therapeutic value. And all of these things, we would see publications here and there. And then, of course, new forms of biases associated with alternative metrics. The most difficult bias would be the bias of that all of these are really highly dependent on internet access. So that scientists or researchers would need to take advantage or use all of these online based shall we say tools and procedures, right? But we have to face the fact that not everyone is really very good when it comes to social media. Yes, and therefore we might be creating a new form of hegemony, that is researchers who are very good in social media as opposed to those who are not, right? And this, of course, creates a bias. This means that those researchers are very good in social media will have their research as promoted, while maybe a very good research without such a capability will not be as promoted. And of course, predatory journals. For example, this is an example. What is the difference between these two? Current medical research and opinion, as opposed to Journal of Current Medical Research and Opinion. What's the difference? One is predatory and one is not. Which one is? How do we know? It was a painful experience, for example, in the University of Oslo, because one PhD student submitted a draft, or shall we say, a publication in one of these, which happened to be the predatory one. So just for you to know, it is the latter one, the Journal of Current Medical Research and Opinion, which is predatory. Well, the first one is the one that's legitimate. But you can see predatory journals are not just journals with some fancy names, but they try to even mimic, the names of shall we say real journals. Now, just very quickly, the Responsible Open Science in Euro project, the ROSI project. So the ROSI project aims to, of course, to contribute towards minimizing the risks of open science that we have just seen, and many more that we have heard of prior to me talking. So the ROSI project aims to provide guidance and tools related to the research ethics and research integrity, legal and social implications and challenges inherent in open science, thereby facilitating the integration of research ethics and research integrity as a structural component of open science in Europe. So open science is fantastic, but as we know, and those of us familiar with open sources or open tools such as social media tools, it can go very wrong, right? And that is why it's important that open science is always according to research ethics, research integrity, legal and social guidance. And this is what the ROSI project intends to do. It has several work packages, of course, and two of the work packages are in charge of coming up with a stakeholder forum and a cross-South community of practice. But we will also provide a knowledge hub and also a complement to the European Code of Conduct, at the same time provide training materials. All of these things are still in the process of being created. Initial results based on the work of Work Package 6 by Dr. Olivier Legal and Maud Medvez. So this was a workshop that contained a lot that was participated by a lot of ERICs, European Research Infrastructure Consortia, that explored research ethics, research integrity, and legal challenges and gaps, solutions they have, and their expectations. The responses were mostly on challenges and gaps, which I will present to you in 30 seconds. Example of burning questions posted by participants would be, as an end user, how can I trust that the online data set which I am about to reuse is not the result of falsification or fabrication? Very difficult question. Again, we have no clear answer to it. Another question, how can I trust that it has not been produced against ethical rules, such as informed consent of questionable validity, or breaches to animal welfare, among others? Again, a very important question. And again, we do not have an answer. We made a study a long time ago of clinical trials, and we discovered, for example, that of all the clinical trials submitted to the European Medicines Agency, at least 1/3 or almost a half of them have ethically relevant questions. What do we do with such data, and how do we even start discovering them? You know, and with open data, and we now open more users to such data. But in the first place, how do we make sure that the data that's open to users were ethically gathered? Right? Particular challenges, ERICs in particular were challenged by the little power or force they had in promoting open data, and that in fact those that have the power to do such would be, of course, the institutions and national policies. Nevertheless, of course, ERICs are in a position to raise awareness, to facilitate and encourage data sharing, and of course, offer training. Also, they were very specific that guidelines and trainings were essential, but they must be discipline specific. They also raised
5 minutes left, Rose. I'm sorry.
Okay. Sorry. There was also the issue of ethics and legal. There was also the issue of costs. It was very costly to do such things, but also very difficult to find persons who are trained, such as the ones that we have here. If somebody leaves, then you know, it's very difficult to find somebody else to replace that person. Informed consent challenges, I have mentioned this already a while ago, so I will skip this to give space for Soren. Okay, just some promotions of the ROSI project. If you're interested to be part of the stakeholder forum and cross-staff community practice, please visit the ROSI website. Thank you. Soren?
Yeah, hello. I'm just going to try to give sort of a practical example of one of the issues that the project is looking into and will try to provide guidance on, and that is an issue which has already been discussed by other presenters here around open data. Now we have the FAIR principles, which describe what should happen, that metadata and data should be stored in a way so that they're findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And that describes how the world should be ideally. But seen from a research integrity point of view, we do have the problem that with the current incentive structure, at least in some areas of research activity, researchers do not have an incentive actually to follow the FAIR principles. Until we get our incentive structures, for instance, in relation to promotion in universities, aligned with the open data agenda, researchers will, in certain circumstances, have incentives to make their, well, to comply or seemingly comply with the FAIR principles without actually complying with them. They may fear competitors using their data, or they may simply think that they have some kind of ownership and won't want to share. And the problem with this is that outside of the areas of research activity where open data sharing has been common for a number of years, we lack a set of community standards. If I, for instance, were a social anthropologist, there is no real set of community standards which describe what my obligations of data sharing is. And most social anthropologists would never have heard about the FAIR principles. And this creates a really practical research integrity issue, because if as an institution we get a complaint about some problem with a set of open data, what standards are we going to judge this against? So I think one of the things that Rosie is looking into is how we can solve these quite practical research integrity issues when open data sharing either hasn't happened or data have been shared in a way so they are less than optimally interoperable and reusable. So this was just to give one example of one of the things that we are working on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Søren, for that. Okay, interesting project. And let's see if we have any questions on that. Okay, there is a question from Antonio, who points to the fact that, very good points in favor of open science have been made. For example, an end user might not know about the veracity of an open data set, but the fact that it is open allows others to investigate these issues. For example, by using specific statistical techniques, I interpreted the real problem to be a lack of verification of the open products. Could Dr. Bernabeu or other panelists elaborate on that?
Yeah, I can give a short comment on that. And obviously, if I was using someone else's data set, the optimal situation would be that I perform some statistical checks, for instance, to see whether this data set was falsified or modified or manipulated in some way. But we know that especially in very rapidly moving areas of research, that doesn't happen. And as you probably know, during COVID-19 situation, some of the retractions from very, very prestigious journals were because researchers had relied on data sets that were problematic in various ways and had not performed these checks. So yes, it would be ideal that researchers verify the data sets that they use, but we know that that doesn't always happen.
Inge, you also have something to add?
If I may.
Absolutely.
Yes, well, that's one of the principles in open science, of course. It's opening up of the research process and be able to review not only the publication in the end, but several aspects within the research process, including the data sets. This means there's a lot of data coming out. It's really, it's an overflow of data, of information. But I'm afraid that this is the problem of our century, let's say. There's an overload of information, overload of data. And as we have seen, it's rather easy to create fake news or whatever. So reviewing and reviewing of data process, of research processes in all its aspects will become more important. And it will increase trust and trustworthiness of research. And we have seen lately how some people do not trust research anymore, and that is a problem. And we have to make sure that by using transparent research processes that are verifiable, that we can increase that trust. But this means that there's quite some work, and then you come to another aspect. It is important that you are acknowledged in doing review of existing work as well, not only doing novel research yourself, because we will need researchers that verify some aspects of a research process to make research more trustworthy. And this is one of the discussions going on when we talk about research assessment, for example, research evaluation. How do you do that, and how can you acknowledge the different roles researchers have in the research process?
Okay, we have time for one last person, and I see that Sylvia also has her hand up. So Sylvia, if you want to add on that very shortly.
Yeah, I was just complimenting on this and subscribing to what Inge and also Soren has been saying. And indeed, we see also the value of sharing data, for example, in reproducibility, because even in the COVID-19 pandemic, we have seen that one of the problems was that the data were not made available, and that many of the articles did not have even a data availability statement. And when it's that, of course, it's a problem because you cannot trust the results, others cannot verify. And I agree very much with what Roberto was putting in Q&A, that this calls indeed in favor of open science. Making this open and transparent can also open up to the scrutiny of others. And then the other important point that was mentioned about the research assessment system and how research assessment will incentivize these practices. Such behaviors will not happen in a more systematic way unless they are not properly incentivized, also in career evaluation and progression, in the evaluation of research. So this is really fundamental. Otherwise, the behavior will be, okay, as a researcher, I will not share, not because I don't want to, but because, okay, it's still time and efforts that are requested on me and not valued, because at the end of the day, I'm not rewarded for that, but I'm rewarded for other things like keeping the data for myself so that I can have other publication with those and so on. So reforming research assessment is crucial. And as the Commission, we are also working on that.
Okay, thank you, Sylvia. Remaining questions that are still in the Q&A will be answered, so feel free to check them. But now I think it is time for a break. Borana?
Yes, thank you so much to all speakers this morning and to Stephanie for the very nice moderation. We deserve a break, so let's meet at 10:35 for the second session. Grab a coffee or tea and see you later.
Enjoy your coffee or tea.
Yes. Welcome back. I hope you had a refreshing break. So now we have totally different perspective for the next session. So Jonas, I give you the floor for the moderation of the next session. Enjoy.
Thank you, Borana. Great to see so many people present and so many people active in both the chat and the Q&A. Please keep on. So now we're going to turn to the second session. We should focus more on more specific challenges and a good example of how to solve these challenges in the area of open science, with specific, of course, focus on ethics and integrity. We will have this question addressed from two perspectives, the publisher perspective and also from the research performing organization perspective. And first out is Kelly Woods from F1000, Senior Associate Publisher, who is responsible for looking after Open Research Europe in collaboration with some different partners, including Liber, Eurodoc, and DYA. She has a background in open access scholarly publishing, and prior to joining F1000, she worked at Frontiers and the Royal Society on numerous open access titles. So very happy to have you here, Kelly. Please, the floor is yours.
Excellent, thank you. I'll just share my screen. Perfect, okay. Let me move that out of the way. So thank you very much for inviting me to talk today about how publishers are adapting to an open research landscape. I'm really excited to be part of this very lively discussion today. So within this theme, I would like to explore the gatekeeping role of journals and how that has changed over the years, the threat of predatory publishing, what it is and how to recognize it, some changes and new developments in the peer review process, and finally, the growth in open data policies and the potential ethical challenges that these pose. So firstly, let's explore the gatekeeping role of journals a little bit more. So traditionally, journals, or rather journal editors, were seen as gatekeepers of research. They decided what got published, what was disseminated, and what wasn't, through a process of normally closed peer review. This depended on the critique of an editor from the editorial board and a number of peer reviewers that normally remained unidentified to the authors. If the reviews were not favorable, then the paper would be rejected and the process would likely start again at another journal. For journals operating on a subscription model, it was fundamental that they only published the best and most impactful and interesting papers to ensure libraries and institutions saw the value in having access to the content published in their journal. This process meant that you could have faith that the content you were reading in these journals was good, sound science and had undergone scrutiny to prove its validity. With the introduction of open access and the article processing charge, the need to publish only the most impactful research waned, and we began to see an increase in journals publishing all sound or valid science, including negative results. Alongside this came the rise of the preprint server, and so more and more nowadays, especially since the COVID-19 pandemic, authors are the ones that are choosing what to publish, whether this be in a non-impact based journal with peer review or on a preprint server without it. We have also seen a move away from the more traditional metrics that were calculated at the journal level, such as impact factor, with more emphasis being placed on the article level metrics, such as views, downloads, and alternative attention scores like altmetrics. It seems that the role and importance of the journal in gatekeeping research is lessening, but the role of peer review remains very strong, and this continues to take place in a variety of different ways, which I'll explore a little bit more later. I would pose that the peer review process, rather than the journal, was always the true gatekeeper of research, and we should not be asking whether journals are still the gatekeepers, but rather we should ask whether this was ever really the case. Open Research Europe is an innovative open access publishing platform that sits somewhere between a more traditional journal and a preprint server. Submissions are checked by our in-house editorial team for a number of different measures, such as plagiarism, appropriate methods, and appropriate description of those methods, and also relevant ethics approvals. After passing these checks, they're published as a preprint and then undergo post-publication peer review. This is a very author-led model of publishing that does not rely on an external editor to make decisions about a manuscript, but still heavily relies on peer review to check the validity and the soundness of the science. The in-house editorial checks we have go some way to offsetting the mistrust that people have previously had in preprints by validating some basic elements of the paper before publication. These sorts of checks are not always guaranteed on more conventional preprint servers, which is why we sit somewhere in the middle. So I mentioned earlier a shift from subscription-based business model to an article processing charge-based business model of publishing, and how this allowed for a change in what could actually be published in a journal. This shift also led to the phenomenon of predatory publishers. Using this model, journals could move away from publishing only the most impactful work and instead publish all valid science, irrespective of the perceived impact of the result. Open access journals no longer charged people for access to their content and instead charged to publish each of the papers. But this raised concerns over the quality of the published papers. If the journal is making money from each published article, what is their motivation to reject articles? And could they be accepting everything without thorough peer review just to increase profits? It is worth noting that there is some healthy debate in the industry as to what actually constitutes predatory publishing and whether this term is even appropriate and should be used, but I'm not going to open that can of worms today. Thankfully, there are a number of things to look out for when considering where to publish your research, and that can assist you in ensuring that you do not fall prey to publishing in a predatory journal. You can check in the directory of open access journals, or DOAJ, to check whether the journal is listed there. Journals have to submit an application to be listed here, and they must meet certain criteria to be accepted and included. The editorial, licensing, copyright, and ethical policies should all be detailed on the website and be easy to find and relatively easy to understand. You can check whether the journal is affiliated with or has accreditation from relevant industry organizations, such as the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, ICMJE, or COPE, the Committee on Publication Ethics. Predatory journals might also claim to have an excellent impact factor that cannot be verified within the JCR database, or they may claim to have another metric that you've actually never heard of and doesn't really exist. You should also check where the journal is indexed and what policies they have in place for long-term preservation of content. And finally, is the journal affiliated with any reputable societies, institutions, funders, or platforms? Or publishers. The question does remain, can content published in potentially predatory journals still be cited? And I would say proceed with caution here. Just because something was published in a potentially predatory journal does not immediately mean that it is low quality or not good science. Many excellent researchers, including those with very competitive funding, have been fooled before. And unfortunately, once something has been published in a predatory journal, it can be very difficult, if not impossible, to publish that elsewhere. So you cannot be sure of the quality of the science as it has not had the peer review stamp of approval, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. You just can't be sure. So just proceed with caution when considering citing papers from potentially predatory journals. As an example, you can see here all the different policies, guidelines, and terms and conditions on Open Research Europe to give you an idea of the depth of policies needed to run a reputable publishing platform. I'm not going to bore you by going through all of the policies now, but just to demonstrate how in-depth that section needs to be. As academic publishing has changed over the years, changes have also had to happen in the peer review process to keep up. Traditionally, peer review was fully blinded and fully closed, but now both of these factors exist on a sliding scale. Both the authors and the reviewers might be known or unknown to each other throughout the process, or only revealed at the end, or not revealed at all in the case of the reviewers. Peer review can also now range from closed to open, with the full peer review reports being shared at the end of the review process, during the process, or not at all. A summary of the requested changes, normally written by the editor, may be made available alongside the article instead. This open peer review model has raised a lot of questions around whether this makes people more or less likely to agree to review papers, and whether it might put early career researchers at a disadvantage, especially when being asked to review the paper of a more senior and well-respected researcher in the field. However, more research is needed to determine whether this is actually the case, as we do receive a lot of very positive feedback from the authors of papers that have undergone a fully open peer review process. It reduces the opportunity for bias and ensures the constructiveness of the feedback and the overall quality of the review due to its open and transparent nature. And it also increases opportunities for collaborations, in particular for those early career researchers, because the identities of the reviewers are known and you can reach out to them outside of the process. Although peer review may be considered the true gatekeeper of research, there are still a number of issues with it in its current format. With a consistently increasing number of journals and articles to go along with that, the issue of reviewer fatigue has also been more generally discussed, with many journals and journal editors reporting it's getting harder and harder to get researchers to agree to review due to an overwhelming number of invitations to do so. The issue of credit for the work of reviewers has also been widely discussed and is hotly debated. The idea of financial remuneration could be potentially problematic if it was felt reviewers were more likely to get invited or paid if they accepted an article rather than rejecting it, particularly within the article processing charge model of open access publishing. Platforms like ORCID go some way to crediting reviewers for their work, but only if the peer review process is at least somewhat open. For fully closed peer review, the only form of credit researchers receive is the list of reviewers that journals publish at the end of every year, if they do this. More work needs to be done in this area to incorporate the time and effort that is taken to complete a constructive peer review when assessing a researcher's contribution to the field. One of the newest developments in the peer review process is the involvement of artificial intelligence in review. A lot of publishers have started to use their own algorithms or make use of existing databases and software in order to match potential reviewers to incoming submissions to assist in swiftly finding reviewers for their papers. One open access publisher, Frontiers, has even taken this a step further and has begun to utilize artificial intelligence to assist in their research integrity checks with ERA, their artificial intelligence review assistant. According to the Frontiers blog, ERA reads each paper and makes recommendations on the assessment of language, the integrity of the figures, detection of plagiarism, as well as identifying potential conflicts of interest. The increasing amount of academic research being published and the growing demand for high-quality peer review makes it hard to dispute the need for the assistance of novel technologies in peer review. However, there are concerns that this rigorous and stringent process should not be handed over entirely to machines, and I have to agree. The use of these tools to aid and speed up the process could be revolutionary to peer review, but we should definitely be cautious about relying on software such as this to make such complex decisions, especially if the rationale for its decision-making is not made open, transparent, and clearly available. Finally, peer review forms a major part of the validation process, but open data policies are also becoming more and more common and more important given the current reproducibility and replicability crisis. Of course, making your data open alongside your article makes it easier for others to conduct these reproducibility studies and is another way that you can garner more trust in your research. However, it can be very confusing to determine how to share and how much to share. The FAIR guidelines, which have been discussed a couple of times today already, are a great place to start to make sure that you are sharing your data in a useful way. And there's a wealth of information available on their website, which is go-fair.org. At Open Research Europe, we provide extensive guidelines to assist with this process that are fully compliant with the new open data requirements laid out in the Horizon Europe grant agreement. We ensure that data is deposited into a trusted repository and provide a large list of suggested repositories that people can use. And of course, they can always email us if they really don't know where to start. We know that open data can seem quite intimidating the first time you do it, and we're on hand to advise. We also recognize that there are times that you may not be able to make your data open due to the nature of that data itself, if it contains identifiable data, for example, or due to any intellectual property restrictions placed on your work. Under Horizon Europe, it is imperative to think carefully about the expected results of a grant to ensure appropriate intellectual property rights are defined from the onset of a research project and form part of the grant agreement. So if there's a valid reason for these results to be kept closed, this has been agreed and is documented clearly. It's also worth mentioning that making something open does not mean it is left unprotected. Work which is made openly accessible can still be protected by copyright licenses and other related rights with regard to how the work can be reused and exploited, such as the CC BY licenses that have already been talked about a couple of times as well. We would strongly encourage beneficiaries of Horizon Europe to make use of the European Intellectual Property Help Desk for all their intellectual property related queries and concerns to ensure that they can comply with the open access requirements of the grant agreement while still safeguarding the results and data where necessary. And finally, just to say that while there are still some ethical issues around making science fully open that require further work within the academic publishing community, the benefits of open science, both for the author and the reader, far outweigh any potential risks. Thank you for your attention, and I would welcome any questions.
Thank you, Kelly. And the timing was perfect.
Yes.
Appreciate as an organizer. I don't see any new questions in the question and answer forum, so I think we can go on with the next speaker, and you can still ask questions for addressed to Kelly meanwhile, and we will get back and have a somewhat longer discussion at the end. So we'll move on to our next speaker, who is Judith De Haan, who is a program manager of the Open Science program at Utrecht University. She's directed the integrated approach of the program and connected the policies and plans with their implementation at the university. She has a background in biomedical sciences and did her PhD at the experimental cardiology department at the University Medical Center in Utrecht. So very happy to have you here, Judith. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. I'll share my screen.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, perfect. So thank you for having me and sharing some of our experiences of the Open Science program that we are having in the University of Utrecht. So I will start with the why of open science. We've heard already a lot about it, but I would still like to start with the why, because we always start with the why in Utrecht as well. Because for us, open science is a means to an end, is not the goal on itself, but we want to do open science for specific ways. And then I will tell you something about how the program of open science looks at Utrecht University, and will highlight some examples of our program. And I'll end with an example where we run into some ethical and integrity issues and share the lessons that we learned. So why are we moving towards open science? There are a lot of issues that led to the existence and the rise of open science, and a lot have been mentioned already. For example, the replication crisis was mentioned before in the talk. In the biomedical field or in the psychology field, there was a huge replication crisis, and that led to the existence of open science. But also the monopolized and expensive publication market, for example, the non-recognition of importance of knowledge commons outside of specialist communities, the brain drain, the publisher barrier. So there are various ways that led to the existence of open science. So how does this work? So this is the credibility cycle that we show, and how it works now. If you start, you get with doing research, you get some money funding, for example. So your supervisor gets money, and he will hire a PhD student, for example, to start working on data, producing data that will lead probably in the end to a nice publication. So there will be articles published, and if you're lucky, it will be in a high impact journal, and that will give you a lot of citations, and your H-index will be much higher, and that will lead to like great performance assessment, and that will make you, as maybe a PhD student, you can get funding yourself. And then you can start this whole circle yourself. So if you get money, you can hire staff, you can produce data, that will lead to production of articles, hopefully again in high impact journals, and this circle goes on and on. That's how it goes right now. However, if you see, society is completely absent from this circle. And if you look, for example, at biomedical research or in the healthcare system, the patient is not present in this circle. So you can go through the circle, do research on health issues, but the patient is never ever questions or in this circle. So we think that society should be in this circle. So if you can see here the issues that are there. So this hyper competition for the limited funds works against team science, multidisciplinarity, diversity. We are only publishing articles and other research output are left behind. For example, data is not shared as we've heard before. It's very helpful to also share your data open whenever it's possible. And also the recognition, it's only done on quantitative measures. So the quality is measured on quantitative measures, so such as the amount of articles that you published, the journal impact factor, the H-index, the amount of money that you obtained. And we think that we should, with opening up science and by moving towards open science, you are going to introduce society into this circle and introducing more transparency in this whole circle, which will lead to science for society. So the overall aim for open science is to increase the quality, the progress and scientific and societal impact of research and scholarship, and to achieve these goals in the practice of open science one does. So by opening up, you will engage with society, you will engage with the stakeholders that are relevant for your research, to be able to define the right questions, but also to have the impact that you want with your research immediately in the right place. And to be able to do that, you have to share also openly what you're doing. So in the whole research process, you want to be as open as possible. So in Utrecht, we have an open science program to stimulate the open science uptake in the whole university. So this is the infographic that we use to explain in the university the why of open science. So here you see the past, where science and society were interacting, but not completely. They were kind of touching each other. And here in the end, the future where we want to go to, science and society is really integrated, which will lead to more impact of your research. It will lead to multidisciplinary and inclusive teams. There will be cooperation instead of competition. We will be transparent on what we do. We will share the data and the code that we use. So this is why we are moving towards to lead for science for a better world. So the program looks like this right now. So we have 4 tracks. One is on open access, so the open access publishing, which we've heard already a lot about. We have 1 track on fair data and software, which will stimulate the to make the data for researchers to make their data fair, but also their software fair, and to share it openly wherever it's possible. Of course, we have the public engagement track, where we stimulate researchers to really work together with societal stakeholders when it's beneficial, but also to share your knowledge with a broader audience. And to make this all possible, we have the recognition and rewards track. So to make researchers also that they will be able to do this, they need to be recognized in a different way, because now researchers are really awarded on research papers only, and not on all these other sharing of data openly or engaging with the public. So I will highlight one example from our Recognition and Awards working group. So they've been working on a new vision on recognition and awards within the University of Utrecht. And here you also see the movements towards a future where we want to head to. So in the past, there was a primary focus on research output only when we assess our academics. And it was also very focused on individuals. And here you see it was mainly the output what we were focusing on. So the quantity of the published papers, the funding that you receive, your H index or the impact factors of the journals where you published into. But we want to move forward to an assessment of academics where we have a more diverse way of looking at what research or academics actually do. So instead of only focusing on research, we also focus on what people do for education, because in a university you have, of course, also a very important task in educating the new generation of academics or students that will start working in society. You have also professional performance. For example, in a hospital, you also are part as a doctor, for example, in healthcare. You create impact with these various aspects. And also you have leadership tasks for not everyone, but a lot of people have leadership tasks in academia. And also we are working as teams. So we should also look how a team is actually performing and not only look at an individual, but what is your contribution as one member of the team to the team goals and strategies. So this is the way we want to move forward. And a vision was created by this working group, and it's called the triple model. And if you are interested, you can read also this vision because we published it, of course, openly online. And in this triple model, we have an acronym which stands for, we are looking at teams, we will look at research, impact, professional performance, education, and leadership. And all these domains are important in the academia and should be rewarded to move forward also with open science. So what we have been in the program now for 2.5 years, the Open Science program, and what we have been noticing is that open science in education is essential to actually reach the goals of open science, because if the new generation of students is not educated in an open science way, they will fall back in the old way of doing research. So that's why we are adding a 5th track to our program, which is called Open Science in Education. And with this track, we want to make sure that open science is incorporated into the education system at the university as well. So this education track will have 4 different phases. We will focus on the open science mindset. So what I've said before is we feel that it's very important to talk about the why of open science. So why do we want to be open? Why do we want to be transparent? What does it mean if you are working in academia? Who are you as an academic? But of course, we also need open science skill sets, because to make your data open, you need specific skills. To make it fair, you need specific skills. To interact with the public, different skills are needed. So we need to incorporate this in our education as well. And of course, recognition and award is also important for moving forward in education. If we are not going to reward academics, if they are going to invest in education or incorporate this in their education, it will not be possible for them to do this on top of all the other tasks that they have. And the 4th phase of open science in education is the open educational resources. So also your material, your educational material, you can share so that others can reuse it. So this is also something that we want to focus on. So now one example of what we run into, some ethical issues. So to monitor the open science uptake and the awareness and attitudes towards open science practices, but also to monitor whether our open science program is actually helping the open science movement in the university, we set out a open science monitor last year. So it's an online questionnaire where we ask about attitudes, behaviors, of an awareness of 10 different open science practices of academics in the University of Utrecht. So we send out this questionnaire to everyone. So we could find also opportunities where can we push a little bit more because people are aware and they really want to engage with open science, but there's still some obstacles that will prevent them. Maybe we can take away those obstacles, but also find some challenges. So maybe there are faculties or departments where there are a lot of challenges for actually incorporating open science. So maybe we can push that with the open science program and help them with these challenges. So because we also thought that might be interesting later on to publish this questionnaire, we asked also for ethical approval because we ask some demographics of our respondents. We ask some background questions, for example, on their age, nationality, their current position. So you need ethical approval for that. And the process went actually pretty smoothly. So we got this ethical approval. We could move forward. We also, of course, pre-registered our study because we want to give the good example. And then after a while, we sent out our questionnaire. However, the first obstacle was the GDPR. So there were some privacy officers that really got scared when we put our questionnaire online and we asked people to fill out our questionnaire because they thought that we asked too many demographic backgrounds. So they took our questionnaire offline for 2 weeks. That led to a very low response rate, which was a pity. And in the end, when we evaluated what happened is that people are very scared with the GDPR right now, at least what we've noticed in the University of Utrecht. And we used the word anonymized in our informed consent. And we were not very specific about the location where we would store our data, though we said that we would store it in a secured way. And because we said anonymized and not pseudonymized, they got really scared and they took it offline. So in the end, we didn't change anything of our questionnaire, but we just changed a few words in our informed consent and we could move forward. But this was a lesson for us. What we learned that we should be very careful with how you phrase things to make sure that everything is clear and people know that you are GDPR compliant. And then we are running into the second obstacle, the open data part. So of course, we are from the open science program asking our researcher, our academics about open science. We also want to be as open as possible. So we would like to share our data, make our data fair and share it openly. However, we are also working with sensitive and personal information. And we were working in a multidisciplinary team who have different views on sharing your data. Should you remove your demographic data, or will it be less informative for people if they're going to reuse, or actually they can confirm then the findings that you have done if you're going to remove some of the columns. So how are you going to share this openly with all these different views and also be sensitive to the privacy information? But with talking and with moving with different people, with people from the library, with people from IT, we've selected a solution that we think might be very interesting, and that's a federated analysis. It's kind of a small scale federated analysis. It means that the data will be stored in a secured location. People can't reach the actual raw data, but they can select what kind of output they would like to see. For example, they want information on pre-registration and whether this is more done by men or women. People can go to a website and click on these options, and then they will get the output, and they will get the open code on how this information was extracted from the data set, but they will not be able to reach the actual data set. So we hope that this will be a good pilot, and it will be able to also help other researchers in their university which are working with sensitive information, so that they will be able to also create a federated analysis for their projects. So these were this was shortly a little bit about what we're doing in the University of Utrecht and some examples of the obstacles we're running into. And I'm very happy to answer your questions. And if you want to know more about what we're doing in Utrecht, you can go to our website or you can send us an email.
Thank you very much, Judith. You got a lot of positive feedback on your visuals, so please look in the chat.
Thank you.
And we have a couple of questions. I'll start with the ones addressed to Judith, since we have you here, but Kelly, you can be prepared to answer some questions that came up as well if you already haven't done it in the Q&A forum. Marusha Martinez would like to learn a little bit more about the triple model. Tell us more about how you measure those different tracks, teams or leadership, and whether you interview the whole lab. So how do you go about more specifically?
Yeah, so this is a work in progress. So we have this vision on the triple model, which is now discussed on various places in our university. So we have, I didn't show that, but we have faculty open science teams as well. So in each faculty, people are discussing this triple model and what these different letters mean for them. So it really depends if you, in which field you are, what these letters will mean. If you are doing physics, science, or you are working in a hospital. So that is one thing that we're doing. So people should discuss, and they should see what that would mean for their team and how they would want to do this. And on the other hand, we have our working group of our track of the research and recognition and rewards track, which is working together with our HR direction. And they are working on, for example, a leadership training, which will help our leaders to also evaluate their team in this way. But they are also working on some I would say guidelines, but on like a document that will help people to look at these letters and what does it mean and how can you qualitatively look at these letters, but also support it with quantitative measures. I hope that will answer her question.
I hope so too. Just get back with follow-up questions if you want to elaborate more. We have a question from Fiona Brennan, which I also had in mind. Actually, I was also a bit surprised that these issues about the use of the term anonymized, for instance, and the privacy issues didn't come up in the ethical approval process. So Fiona asks whether you have no interaction between the data protection unit and the ethical review board, and how do you know why that happened? Is there explanation for that mishap, as I would actually like to describe it?
So we were also a little bit surprised. I think that there has been some miscommunication, I guess, that they didn't, that's why it happened. Also in the university, we have different faculties and you apply for ethical approval at one faculty. So we did that at the social science faculty. But there are more privacy offers, and we would send out the questionnaire to the whole university. So that's also when other privacy officers from different faculties can jump in and see, and they might be scared or they don't know about how this went forward. We feel that, and I'm actually curious if others have the same experience, that people get more and more strict and more scared with the GDPR, and that people are more in, no, don't share unless we make really sure that it's safe and everything is protected, and this is really a need to be open, instead of let's be open and make sure that everything is protected. So I'm not sure if the others have experience with that too.
I think it's important to emphasize that many of the things that the GDPR is supposed to safeguard are also things that should be covered by the ethical review process, of course, and the things you're saying now, that it should be open, but make sure that everything is safe. That's, of course, everyone would agree to that. But the question is, how do we do that? And how do we foresee the consequences of certain kinds of publishings? I mean, again, we don't perhaps always have the answer to how this data will be used, and how we can guarantee that it's really anonymized, for instance. I mean, in this case, you were explicit at the end that you actually were just pseudonymizing the data, but used the term anonymized. I mean, it's important to have all these both the terms, but also the actual more explanations of these terms explicit enough in the informed consent forms.
Yeah.
So that is not just only about the GDPR. I think it's in one way it's good that people are a bit scared because it has put focus on certain very important issues. On the other hand, it also takes focus away from other important issues, both in ethics and of course also in open science.
Yeah.
So thank you. I'd like to go back to make sure that we have time to address this question to Kelly that came up in the Q&A forum. So about predatory publishing, I really like the slide you had on advice for how to orient ourselves in this new landscape where predatory publishing is one of the threats, of course. And this is specifically about the MDPI edited journals and others like it. Do you have an opinion on this? And I mean, how should these be categorized? Is it appropriate to categorize them as predatory? You mentioned briefly that there has been discussions about the notion of predatory journals. So would you like to elaborate a little bit on this?
There definitely has. And I am not about to put myself in the business of saying who is and isn't predatory. That is a very dangerous game to play. What I will say is one of the typical criteria that's used to assess whether a publication might be predatory is sometimes the rejection rate. So traditionally, journals will have a very high rejection rate. They're only interested in capturing the highest impact or the best quality, which is not always meaning the same thing. Papers. However, if you're going to compare an impact-based journal with a sound science-based journal, you're obviously going to have very different rejection rates, and that does not necessarily mean that the papers published in the sound science journal are invalid. There definitely can be very stringent peer review processes in there to make sure that all of the papers are sound and valid, but they may not be the most impactful work going. They might include negative results as such. So the rejection rate isn't really a valid way to check whether a publication might be considered predatory. Another common red flag that people use is the volume of solicitation emails that are sent out by the journal or the publisher, especially when those emails refer to fields that are then completely irrelevant to the researcher that's actually receiving those emails. And I think if you jump on Twitter on your average Thursday, you'll probably see some people complaining about that on there. It can get quite lively, particularly if these emails are related to special issues that seem to grow exponentially in number year on year. Now, again, that's not to say that special issues are a bad thing. They promote and group important and timely content together. They can often cross-promote the articles that are also published within the same collection. So if somebody's reading one article, they're going to be more likely to read the other articles in that collection because they're all on a related theme. And they also promote and highlight interdisciplinary fields, which are conventionally missed out in more traditional sort of single focus journals. So it's not to say that they're a bad thing at all, but it's a very gray area. It's a very difficult area, isn't it? Yeah, I wouldn't like to comment one way or the other, but these are some sort of common red flags that people do highlight. And I think this is why it's becoming ever more important to focus on the article level metrics and how the quality of the individual articles that are published rather than the journal or the platform as a whole. So really a lot more work needs to be done at the article level metrics level, so we can find out a little bit more rather than just views and downloads, which is what you see standardly across most publications. And now the alt metric score is becoming more and more common as well. I know that doesn't really answer the question, but I'm kind of being deliberately vague here.
That's perfectly understandable. We won't press you on this, but thanks. I think those are very interesting and helpful points. So let's see, we have a follow-up, I think, from Marusha. I think this is a question. So it comes down to how each faculty to do this triple thing, right? And maybe you can read the question. So Marusha writes, yes, thanks, Judith. So it comes down to each faculty how to do it. And I understood that at least in part, the idea is to find some quantitative measures for these qualitative topics. I'm not sure whether that was a follow-up question, just a confirmation that you provided a good answer.
I'm not sure. I don't hear a question either, but I can. Is the question if what those quantitative measures will be, or because I can say something about that maybe, because
we can maybe ask Marusha to come back to clarify that if that was the question. So a question from Chris Knighting was that to Judith, does the great work you just presented to us also cover UMCU, or do they take care of themselves in this respect?
Yeah, so this is also the UMCU is also the Faculty of Medicine of the university, so it's also included. But of course, it's a special faculty because there's a whole hospital around it. But also they have a faculty open science team, and in Utrecht also, which is maybe good to mention, is that Science in Transition started at the UMC Utrecht as well with Frank Miedema. I'm not sure if you know about this movement, but there they are moving forward also pretty fast with open science. So it's definitely included.
There was also a question about the ERA, the AIRA, the artificial intelligence
review assistant.
Review assistant, yes. So is it already used, and who can use it? Is it just for internal use at Frontiers, or will it be somehow openly available?
Yeah, so ERA was developed internally in-house at Frontiers. As far as I'm aware, it's not openly available. It's only used within the Frontiers journals, for now at least. But as I said in my presentation, you know, other publishers are using AI tools to help identify reviewers. So I think it's a matter of time before similar software comes out in other publishers. But it will be interesting to see the impact that this has on the peer review process widely.
I guess one of the key things there is to note what the final A stands for. I mean, assistant, and what you're pointing to, that you should not expect these kind of tools to just take over the whole work of reviewing articles, but they might be very helpful in. We can compare this perhaps with software for spotting image manipulation. I mean, you can also for plagiarism. I mean, you can spot text overlap, but you need to check it in another way in order to determine whether it's a case of plagiarism or not.
Yeah, so I think the fear when this was first announced was that it was replacing humans in the process and we were leaving peer review up to robots. And I don't think that's what's happening at all. And I don't think that should be what happens at all. A lot of this does require a human expert eye to have a look over these things, especially when, as I said, you know, we don't know the actual code that's gone into this. It's not openly available what exactly leads to the decision-making process in that software. So until that happens, we definitely shouldn't rely on it too heavily. But yeah, I still think that humans are always going to have a part to play in peer review.
So I don't see any more questions in the Q&A for the moment. We have 4 more minutes to go. So if anyone has a question, please take the opportunity to post it now. I had a question perhaps about gatekeeping. I think that's a very interesting issue. And I was thinking a little bit about how to, gatekeeping at the level of referees. So has there been a discussion or ideas about having some kind of system for certification of referees, for instance? That might be a way to tackle some of these difficulties, and also to make it more feasible to reward referees in a proper manner.
Yeah, I think recognition and reward of referees is going to be, or already is, a big issue in academic publishing and in peer review. It is becoming ever harder to get people to agree to review a paper because they're receiving upwards of 5, 10, 15 invitations a day, depending on the seniority of the researcher themselves and the number of papers that they've already published. So we definitely do need to do more to encourage people to want to be certified, if that's how we're going to do it, to be a reviewer, and encourage them to want to review. I guess with open peer review, the process is a little bit more open, at least. So traditionally, reviewers were still, in my opinion, the gatekeepers of research, but we didn't actually know who they were. The authors didn't know who they were either. So it's very difficult. How can you, well, people still trusted it, but I think it's a lot easier to trust the process when you can actually see who submitted the review and exactly what they said, as well as giving them credit. It also allows them to take a little bit of responsibility for the work and the adaptation of the work that's happened as well. So also on the Open Researcher platform, we allow the author's responses to be seen, and the open peer review reports are fully published alongside the articles, as well as all previous versions of the article. So you can really see what it looked like when it was first submitted and how it changed over the various iterations of peer review. But it goes some way to giving credit, but I think it still needs to be factored into a researcher's contribution to their field as to how much time and energy they're putting into providing such constructive peer review, because when done properly, it takes a lot of time.
Thank you. We have 2 minutes left. So we have a question from Daniel Spichtinger to Judith. Great presentation. And he wonders what the take-up was, the reactions among scientists of the University of Utrecht.
On the questionnaire that we send out, I assume, right?
I think more general on the open science and career assessment activities. He specifically mentions the career assessment activities.
How to respond to it. So a lot of, so actually, it's very positive because people want to change and they feel that they are doing a lot of things that they are not recognized or rewarded for. However, it is not an easy way that we're moving towards now, right? So we don't have a number anymore where we can say whether someone is good or a bad scientist. So people feel like, okay, how are we going to assess whether you're doing a good job, yes or no? And this is something that we haven't done for a while. So people have to learn again, like with arguments to say, okay, this is what we've done right. This is what we can do better, and learn from that and move forward. So people feel also, it's not scared, but hesitant in what it will look like in the future, but people are very open to change.
I think it's perfect to close this session on that very positive note, and also a very good reason for closing it is that we are out of time. So
there are a few questions still. If you want to take them, a few minutes.
I think maybe if we shouldn't steal from people's breaks. So if either we take the break now or we extend the break, I think.
Okay, then we can perhaps continue then some discussion in the chat to answer to those questions. If the speakers are fine, you could perhaps respond individually. Yes, sorry, Jonas.
I'm trying to be the really tough moderator here, and Borana is way too nice to people, which is not good for themselves in the end, because you won't get a break if you let Borana decide. Oh, sorry.
Okay, so then I officially then launch the break. For those of you who are able to join the discussion tables, Johanna, she will put the link. Please follow the link. Otherwise, you'll also have it in your mailbox. And for those of you who cannot stay, I would like to thank all the speakers of this morning, all the moderators, and also all who have contributed actually to the development of the agenda from the core group. I would like to acknowledge their contribution. Also the moderators and rapporteurs of the next session. We have 12 of them who have volunteered to guide the discussion, so thanks a lot. Thanks again to my EARMA colleagues here today, and of course to all of you for joining this morning. And I'll see some of you at the next session, and for the others, hope to see you soon for the next events in December or in March next year. Bye-bye.